Welcome back, Trailblazers. Before we dive into today's episode, I want to take a moment to talk about a tool that has completely transformed the way I plan and navigate my hikes, AllTrails Plus. As a Trailheads ambassador and the organizer of the Yakima Valley Trekkers, I'm out on the trails a lot. One of my favorite features of AllTrails Plus is the ability to edit and create my own maps. Conditions change, fallen trees, washed out sections, or even a last-minute reroute. And with AllTrails Plus, I can adjust my route on the fly and share it with others so everyone stays informed and safe. AllTrails Plus also gives you offline maps, wrong turn alerts, and 3D trail previews to help you stay on track and make the most of your adventure. And the best part, you can get 30% off an AllTrails Plus membership with my exclusive link in the episode show notes. So whether you're planning your next big trek or just looking for a new trail to explore, AllTrails Plus has you covered. Check it out and let's hit the trail. Welcome to Season 14 of the Hikes and Mikes podcast. I'm your host, Ivan, and each week we're hitting the trails through conversations with extraordinary hikers from across the United States and beyond. Spring has a way of pulling us back out there. Muddy boots, wildflowers pushing through the thaw, and trails that feel brand new, even when we've walked them 100 times before. There's something electric about this season. When the days stretch longer, the snowpack starts its slow retreat, and the mountains finally say, "Come on up." This season, I've had the privilege of sitting down with hikers whose stories carry the same sense of renewal, of fresh starts, new summits, and the kind of momentum that only comes when you've been waiting all winter to lace up and go. From early season ridge walks and creek crossings swollen with snowmelt to the quiet joy of watching the landscape wake up mile by mile, the voices you'll hear this season remind us that the trail is always calling. You just have to answer. So shake off the cabin fever, air out the pack, and get ready. Season 14 is here, and the conversations ahead are as alive, layered, and full of possibility as a Pacific Northwest spring. In this week's episode, we learn about what happens when a college writing professor trades plagiarism cases for backcountry trails. The answer? You get Jared Champion, aka Snackbox, one of the most thoughtful voices in the outdoor storytelling space. In this episode, Jared shares how motorcycle trips through national parks first sparked his love of the outdoors, leading to a deep dive into backpacking on the Colorado Trail and a life-changing pivot away from academia. We unpack the origin of his legendary trail name, earned on the JMT, snack wrappers included, and explore how he channeled his passion for writing into founding Backcountry Champions Creative Studio, a nonprofit helping outdoor adventurers turn their trail experiences into published books. We talk about the anthology More Than Hope, Lessons from the Colorado Trail, a PCT book coming out this summer, and Jared's unique process for helping first-time authors find the specific, personal stories only they can tell. We also get into the deeper stuff, why storytelling builds community, why the outdoor space needs more diverse voices, and why hiking hasn't gotten old for him the way everything else has. Plus, his ambitious plans to link the High Sierra Trail and the John Muir Trail in one epic trip, and a hard take on earbuds versus nature sounds that you won't want to miss. Without further ado, let's jump into this episode with our guest, Jared, aka Snackbox. Welcome, everyone, to the latest episode of the Hikes and Mikes podcast. I have a really exciting guest with me today. His name is Jared, and he's going to be sharing about his outdoor experiences. Really excited to speak with him today. Jared, we always like to start off by having our guests share a little bit about themselves and how they got started hiking.
Yeah, absolutely. So Jared Champion and trail name Snackbox. We'll talk about that, I think, at some point. I started hiking not early in life. It was a little bit later in my life. I was in graduate school and I started doing these motorcycle trips in the summertime, and I would stop by different national parks and visited a lot of national parks by motorcycle. But when you're with a motorcycle, you have to stay with the bike. You have your gear and stuff gets stolen. And so I visited all these beautiful national parks, but was sort of constricted to the parking lots and campgrounds. So on the third year, I ditched the motorcycle and I got a Honda Element and drove around and really started to dive in and get some backpacking gear and start going on some overnights and had a few longer trips. And the rest is really history. I was hooked from there. I was going to go hike as much as I could from then on. And it's been good to me so far.
The one thing I knew I had to ask you right off the bat is when I first went to your Instagram page, your bio says Snackbox is the name, hiking and dad jokes are the game. So I got to ask, how did the trail name Snackbox come about?
Yeah, that was a fun one. That was on the John Muir Trail. I did that one in 2018, and it was maybe 8 or 9 days in. I was sitting on top of my bear canister, and it was just full of snack wrappers. So just loaded to the brim with snack wrappers. No food left at all. We were going to resupply the next morning, and we were camped next to a couple of young women, like college aged, and we were just talking. And then I said something smart alecky to one of them, and she said, "Shut up and sit on your snack box." And it just stuck from there. And I loved it because it was sort of this combination of like how I like to eat on trail. I do very few full meals. I do a lot more snacks. And so I don't take lunches. I just take snacks. So I'm constantly stopping and having snack breaks. And then also sort of being a smart aleck, and getting called out on it. And then I think phonetically, I think it's just fun. Snackbox it just sounds funny and it's unique. And it's not one of those trail names where there are certain trail names, I won't call anybody out, but somewhere you meet 12 different people with the same trail name. And I like that it was one that unlikely to run into another Snackbox anywhere on the trail.
One thing that I'm always curious about is what folks are bringing out on the trails as far as snacks. And I got to ask, like for you, is there one staple that always makes the pack list?
Absolutely. Snickers bars. It's like the one time I can eat a Snickers bar and know that I don't have to feel bad about it. I can enjoy it and know that it's like got the salt, it's got the sugar and the protein and a good bit of everything for me. So Snickers bars, one per day, every single time.
Now, Jared, one thing that I wanted to kind of dive deep with you is, you mentioned that road trip and shifting towards backpacking and car camping. For you, when did hiking shift from something that you enjoyed to something that became kind of central in your life and also in your creative work?
Yeah, that was a really good question. And I think that the backpacking itself, I started hiking the Colorado Trail. I went out in 2015 and I hiked what's called the Collegiate Loop. And so it's this 180-mile loop on the Colorado Trail where most hikers have to choose to go either east or west around the Collegiate. But then many people have figured out you can just pair those alternate routes around the Collegiates to make a loop hike. And so I did that one. When I was out there, I met some really cool people who were on through hikes and I was really jealous. And then, we got to the part where I was turning to go north and they were continuing south. And I, felt sort of sad that I didn't get to go with them. And so the following year, I picked up at the bottom of the Collegiate Loop and I hiked 230 miles to the end of it. And that was really really formative because I met a lot of folks that I really loved and still keep up with. And in fact, the only person at my wedding who wasn't related to me was somebody I met on that specific hike. It was sort of a running joke in our family that it's like, welcome to the wedding, family, and Wayne. And so Wayne was there. But basically, I started at that point heading out every summer. When I was a college professor, I would go out every summer and try to have some type of hike or big trip or road trip or something of the sort where I went out west. And the hikes really became a place where I got to be myself for a few weeks without all the responsibilities and headaches and stresses and such. And so once I met and married my wife, we moved here to Chicago together and I was commuting for work. And then we were really just trying to figure out what I was going to do because I was as a college professor, I was a writing professor. So teaching students how to start writing their critical essays, not creative writing at all. And, it was a combination of just COVID, kind of everybody moved online. So you lost that sort of personal touch with things. And then ChatGPT came out and my job was about to become plagiarism cases rather than really helping people get better as writers. I was going to spend the lion's share of my time doing these plagiarism cases. So Patty and I had these long conversations and talks about what was next for me professionally because being a professor didn't seem to be making me happy. And so that's when really the switch moved to where I was going to find something in the outdoor space that was going to work for me and try to figure out some ways that this thing that I love so much and had not gotten old for me, which a lot of my hobbies and activities get old really quickly, but hiking hasn't. When we were figuring out what would be a good fit, we knew it had to be something outdoors and community oriented and around people. And so that's really when that shift came from being just like, this is a hobby that I do every summer just to kind of get a break and reset and refresh. To now this is something that's central to who I want to be and the life I want to build and create and the community I want to build. Those sort of things all kind of came together then. And so that was really the pivot point from there. But it was sort of one of those things that was almost kind of felt like it was going to happen at some point regardless, kind of anecdotally, or not anecdotally, I guess these are all anecdotes, right? The plan I initially had was in 2020, I hadn't met Patty yet, and I started a little YouTube channel thinking that I would become YouTube famous because I thought I was silly and goofy enough. And I was starting to do some videos about hikes and do some gear reviews and that sort of thing. And really my goal was I had two giant Newfoundland dogs, and I had this idea that, not to be dark or anything, but, they live 8 to 10 years on average, and they were both about 5 or 6 years, and my student loans were about paid off. And I thought, if I could just get the YouTube channel to be big enough to make enough money to pay for ramen every day, by the time they pass, my loans will be gone, and I can just buy a camper and go out west and do YouTube videos and hiking till I run out of everything, And in the middle of that, that's when I met Patty, and everything changed very, very quickly. So that plan kind of went away. But all that is to say that sort of this idea that something in that sort of media space of some sort outdoors, that was always kind of part of the plan on the horizon. It just took very different form after meeting Patty and having kids and starting a whole new life with new everything. But that was really kind of it too. And I've been fortunate to be able to pursue something different like that, because I think also not something that everybody gets. I know there are plenty of people who don't have the opportunities I have to kind of figure things out this way, especially I'm in my mid 40s, not an opportunity most people get at this point.
Yeah, and that idea and pivot led you to be the founder of Backcountry Champions Creative Studio that helps amplify voices and stories about the outdoors. How did that kind of come about, and can you share the origin story of Backcountry Champions?
So this was all kind of part of that figuring out everything process. And so the start of it was I was just about finished with my student loans, and I needed 7 more months of nonprofit work to get the student loan forgiveness, So I was a grant writer for this really good organization here in Chicago, but I was a very bad grant writer. I was no good at it whatsoever. And so I spent my days just trying to figure out something. And if you're familiar with the film Mile, Mile and a Half, which is a film about the John Muir Trail, they had made that film as what's called under a fiscal sponsorship arrangement with the American Hiking Society, which is, for those of the listeners, it's basically if you have a one-off project that would typically fall under the umbrella of a nonprofit, you can partner with a nonprofit and they give you the nonprofit status and the back of the house and compliance stuff, and then you give them 10% of your fundraising. And so they had done this, and I had this wild idea that I would hike the Colorado Trail with 50-year-old gear to celebrate its 50th anniversary and make a film about it. And I found a nonprofit in Colorado that was willing to be a fiscal sponsor for this. So I started learning sort of fundraising, and this was going to be kind of the new thing. And in the process of doing this, it was wildly expensive, right? Like to try to I worked with a filmmaker who quoted me well over $250,000 to do all the work for me if I wanted him to do the production, which I think was a fair rate, but I just couldn't obviously afford that. But I wanted to fundraise some more. So I came up with this idea that I would produce a book, which I had done as an academic a handful of times, where I would have different people contribute chapters to this book if they had hiked the Colorado Trail, and then I would sell the book and use the funds to help fund the development of this project. And the nonprofit that I was working with, I was working under an academic model where I published a book years ago that this guy here, that it was about second woman ever to climb Half Dome in Yosemite. And I've made $0 off of this. No money, right? So that's the academic model. And so the nonprofit didn't understand that sort of framework. And they were very nervous that I was going to get sued because I was going to make money and none of the other authors would. And I wouldn't personally, but the money would be made for the project. And they thought for sure I was going to get sued. So they said that I couldn't do it as a fundraiser unless I hired an attorney to do the IP release paperwork, which understandable. They were gun shy, but these were all my friends. They were all people that I knew. They weren't litigious. They were eager to contribute and give over chapters. And so what I decided is, instead of hiring an attorney for these releases, I would just use that money to start my own nonprofit that I could then do future projects like this. Because as much as I love doing the film project, and it was a lot of fun and sort of painful for 2 years and a sort of albatross of sorts, I really, doing the book project was my strength. And I saw that as being kind of the future of what I could do, because I was a writing professor. I could lend that expertise, was one that I didn't have to develop, right? I had that in my wheelhouse. I could help writers. I could help them figure things out. I'd worked with people with no confidence and helped them become very strong writers before many times. And particularly those writers who are eager to engage, which when you're a college professor is not always common. It's maybe 1 or 2 in each class. But if you're doing a book about something people love, they're eager, right? And so they're excited. So this is sort of packing the room with those people that I want to work with, and kind of the opposite of doing plagiarism cases. These are people who are sort of painfully connected to these pieces of writing and they are dedicated to it. So that's kind of how the nonprofit came to be, was that I figured I could do this sort of broad sweep umbrella where we do some book projects. I help people who have book ideas. So if any listener has an idea for a book that they've ever wanted to get off the ground and didn't know how, the idea was pretty simple, that I would coach authors through their book process. And at the end, I would have publishing rights. So they would still see their book in print. So we would trade basically my services of coaching and development for publishing rights. And then we would get these great books on the shelf. And so far, it's been really a lot of fun. We had the Colorado Trail book. We've got a PCT book coming out in the early summer. And then ideally, the hope is that the funds made from this will go on to both support future book projects and then also future film projects as well.
And I'm curious, since, you've been able to help out so many authors and creatives, I feel like for me doing this podcast, a lot of the thru hikers are amazing storytellers. And I'm always like, you got to put these stories in a book. And they're like, I'm not a writer. I don't write. For you and your experiences, like, how do you help people overcome that barrier and start sharing their stories in print?
It's a great question, because so many people have these the barrier is the best word, right? Because it's often not that they're not a good writer. It's that they don't know they can write, or they don't have these skills involved, right? And so a lot of my work is really just convincing people that their story is worth telling, especially making it specific, because what we typically get with a lot of essays on the first draft are going to be these sort of broad sweeping, what I call chicken soup for the soul kind of essays, where it's like hiking rejuvenates the soul, and these sort of broad statements that you and I can both say and they both be true, but they're not special to us. But then my job, really, what I do is I try to figure out what's the story that you can tell that nobody else can. And the test I always give people is when you're writing a sentence, right, or a paragraph is probably a better example. If somebody else could write that paragraph and it be true, we're not specific enough. But let's drill down and figure out how we can be more specific, right? So if you say hiking is something that rejuvenates the soul, that's something anybody can say. But if you say hiking is something that reset my life after the loss of a close friend, well, that's something only you can say, right? Presumably, or maybe very few people can, and then you can speak to that experience. So a lot of it is just convincing folks that their stories are worth telling, and then helping them to get specific about those stories. And then some of the things then are just, what do you do when you hit a wall? Right. And we task authors with different word counts. So with each book, depending on how long we're targeting, it'll be anywhere from 4,000 words to 6,000 words, which for those of you having flashbacks to college, right, that's, it's about 250, 300 words per page. So, we're asking people for a 20-page essay often, and that's scary for a lot of folks. But one of the things we can always do is start asking questions, right? And so I'll read your essay and then I'll say, all right, here are 12 questions that as a reader, I wanted you to answer. And you're going to answer those questions. And the first line of every paragraph can be this question in an affirmative answer form. So if my question to you is, how has hiking changed your life? You just answer that question for the first line of the sentence, right? Hiking changed my life by blah, blah, blah. And then you're off and running, right? So one of the things that I found really productive, just as a specific, is giving people a list of 10 to 12 questions that I'd like them to answer, and then sending them off and telling them, your job is to answer these questions, give me a specific example that shows me what they mean, and then dive deeper and reflect on that experience. What does it mean? And by the time you do that for 12 questions, right, we're off and running. We're halfway through our essay, and it's a lot of fun, because then you really get to kind of, as an interviewer, you can follow those leads and see where the most interesting story is going. And you're not tied to what you thought the essay was going to be. You can then let the essay become what it needs to be.
Yeah, and I think your work does this beautifully with blending like the outdoor adventure, but with reflection and creativity, especially the prompts that you give the authors. In your personal opinion, why do you think storytelling is such an important part of the outdoor experience?
Yeah, I think it's so much a part of every experience ultimately, but I think for sure is true is that we are hungry for community. And I think that's why social media sort of has this addictive quality for folks often, that there's this feeling of community, but it's not always genuine. I'm not necessarily the old man on the porch saying all social media is bad. Heaven knows you and I don't talk to each other today if not for social media, right? But I think that there's this sort of facade of connection that can feel like you're engaging, right? And you think about the number of people who, think that their job or they're sort of morally obligated to voice their opinions on things so that they're heard. This kind of thing is maybe valuable, maybe not. But I think that ultimately storytelling is important because it's a way that you can let people understand your experience. You can let people in. It's a way that you can connect, find common ground, right? Which is something we've lost, is that ability to find common ground. We've gotten to a place now where if we find a spot that's uncommon ground, we immediately draw so many conclusions about the other person and their humanity. Sometimes it's true, but most of the time it's not, right? And storytelling is also really important because it's this sort of reciprocal element where, if I tell you my craziest backpacking story, I'm expecting you to come back with yours, and not necessarily in like a one-uppy kind of way, but it's this sort of place where like, isn't that wild? Isn't this something you share? And, I was listening to a story, it might have been, I think it was an NPR story years ago, and it was talking about how people actually change their mind about controversial issues. And, we know for sure that I can present facts to somebody and they're not going to change their mind about something. In fact, often presenting factual information makes people dig in deeper on the thing that's untrue, right? But the one thing that consistently changes people's mind is if they know somebody who is personally affected by an issue and care about that person, right? And so I think that storytelling is a way for us to make sure that we have a broad understanding of each other and the issues that connect us and the issues that isolate different people, and making sure we understand where they're coming from. And it's part of what I love about backpacking, right? When you're backpacking on a long trail, you stop for the night, and any given night, there'll be 7 different people. The sheer number of coincidences that led to you all sitting on that remote patch of earth in the middle of nowhere together with your backpack, it's incredible to think about. But it's this place where you can kind of connect and find that common ground. And typically everybody's different from a different walk of life. And so I think that storytelling really helps to bridge some of those gaps that we have culturally and personally. And there's still certainly work to be done. I mean, I'm not blind to the fact that when I go camping and backpacking, most of the people that I meet look something similar to me. And that's not where it can stay as a hobby, right? Like it needs to be a space where the people we see look very different than a 40-year-old white guy from the middle class, right? We need a much more diverse kind of coalition if we're going to have these spaces protected for the future. But anyway, that's a long way off from the initial question. But I mean, I do think that storytelling is a place where we can really start gluing together that community that we all, I think, are really desperate for, especially post-COVID.
That kind of leads me to the book, More Than Hope, Lessons from the Colorado Trail, where you brought in multiple voices to help write and contribute to this book. It seems almost like your experience on the trail of, setting up camp, meeting these people, sharing stories, kind of planted the seed for the book. Can you share a little bit about what inspired this anthology?
When I generated the idea initially, I wanted a couple of different things. One is I knew I wanted really great essays from gifted authors, right? And then I started making a list of the folks who I knew who might be willing to contribute. And it was really cool to see that, I had been out there on the Colorado Trail a bunch, but it took me 7 or 8 minutes to get a list of 12 really gifted authors. And there was only one person who said she couldn't contribute, but it was because she was heading out on the PCT, and now she's the editor of the PCT collection that's coming out. But I was able to get every person who, I had 4 people who were professional writers in some capacity already. I had other folks from, various walks of blogging life and written word. And it was just really cool to see that in this time hiking, I'd met so many gifted writers that I was able to put together this list of authors in a matter of minutes. It was just really fun to see. And then when we were coming up with the idea, I wanted to make sure that the book, and this is so true for all the books that we'll produce moving forward, but I wanted it to be more than just, here's a cool hike I took. Because if everybody reads 12 chapters of here's a cool hike I took, that's really going to get tedious, right? Like you might enjoy it, but eventually you're going to get tired of the same Georgia Pass was really hard and Hope Pass was tough. But I sent them out and I said, listen, I want you to think about this and try to see if you can come up with like a 1-word lesson. If you could sum up the lesson in 1 word, then we're there. We're at something that's unique. And that way we can make sure we hit a range. And it can be community or persistence or determination or growth, whatever it may be. And everybody came back and they all had these really great chapters and ideas, and just as sort of a preview of the next project, the PCT book, we asked all the authors to choose one picture that tells us a story they want to share. And it's so cool. Some of the photos we told them it didn't have to be this epic landscape, right? It could be a picture of a blister on your toe if that leads to a story that we want to hear. And we've got a number of them from various different people who are tied to this community. And I think this is one of the things that I'm sure you'll appreciate is that cool thing about the hiking community is it's so much more than just the hikers, right? Like we've got trail angels who are part of this. And what made me think we've got all these different people, trail angels, we've got section hikers, we've got through hikers, we've got folks who quit the trail, we've got folks who yo-yoed the trail, we've got, all this range. But one of the photos is this really great, it's a trail angel out of San Diego, and she spends many months in the spring driving folks to the trailhead. And that's what she does. She never really hiked much of the trail, but she's been to the trail and been a part of this community for a long, long time. And she got this beautiful picture of a person, and it's a photo of her rear view mirror in the car. And it's daylight, kind of dusty, monument, hiker taking off, rear view mirror, clearly. I mean, it's just the coolest picture, but it leads us to these sort of conversations about what it means to be a member of a community and then peripheral to it. But anyway, with the Colorado Trail book, I wanted people to have these sort of lessons that they could teach and share and anchor. And that way they were free from the burden of telling us sort of the day-by-day journal of what they did. And so we've got one chapter that covers a CT hike all the way to a CDT hike, so 3,600 miles. But we've got another chapter that's one day, like a 12-hour stretch of somebody's hike, And so it was really cool to see that sort of the range there too. I was blown away by the chapters, and even there were a couple of them that were so good that I felt guilty about including them, because I'm like, this needs to be read by so many people, and I don't know that I can get it in the hands of all the people that need to read this. So, I mean, I do think it's been a really fun project in a way that I've never been this excited about student essays before, and that's the other piece of it that has me pretty juiced,
You mentioned that these stories, share experiences with the community. And I think for you have a unique perspective because you through hiked the Colorado Trail, but then you also got to read these stories from multiple people. In your own experience, what did you learn from the other contributors that surprised you, whether it was on trail or off the trail?
The biggest thing I learned was something I'd sort of known, but just the generosity that people have and the openness. I was really impressed with how many of the chapters shared sort of worries and anxieties and these fears that people had or failures that they had on the trail. And I think that's a really important part of this, of the hiking community, right? That there's this tendency that often emerges in different sports and activities where people try to seem more hardcore than they really are, really try to beef up the danger in different experiences. And I was really pleased to see that the friends that I had made along the way shared this sort of value with me, that they were very much interested in offering a very real perspective of what it means to be a hiker, what it means to be somebody in the outdoors. And that often is ugly, right? It's often worries about different things, ranging from prairie dogs to clicking in your knee or what have you. And so I think one of the things is this sort of openness and generosity that they had with their storytelling and willingness to let people in. That was really one of my favorite pieces. And I'd sort of sensed that with many of the people. I mean, part of what I liked about all of them when I met them was sort of how open they were to being around somebody with my energy, and it was really cool just to see, because there weren't any chapters in the book that were like, you're going to die, you're going to get out there and you better be ready to fight a bear or something, They were all very much stories like, you're going to be okay. This is going to be tough. You're going to figure things out. And I really love that part of it.
Yeah. And I think for me, what stood out is this anthology rethinks the ideas like what success looks like, what is gratitude, what is community. How did hiking the Colorado Trail reshape those ideas for yourself?
I've been fortunate to have been able to do so many miles on the trail there, that about 100 miles short of 4 full through hikes on the trail. And I think that, the way that it has changed me over the years has come back to this idea often of like problem solving and confidence, and sort of this ability to pull from a space inside myself that this sort of problems can be solved and things can be worked through, and I'm capable of a lot more than I thought. I mean, it's worth knowing that when I was in high school, I was the chunky kid, I was 5'8" and I was 240 pounds and unathletic, and I'm still not much smaller than that, but I am forever surprised at what I'm capable of doing and out there accomplishing and able to hike. And I love the idea that when I get out there, there are always people that I meet that are doing things that are so much more impressive. And think back to these different people I meet along the trail. I met a woman once and she was 68 and she was 1,800 miles down the Continental Divide Trail when I met her. And, that was just one of those like really cool things. I met a guy who was 94 and he was hiking and he had to wear a bicycle helmet because his family wouldn't let him hike unless he was willing to wear a helmet. But he was out there still making miles. He was 100 miles down the Colorado Trail and just sort of plugging along. And I think that what it just changes for me is my sense of who I am around people and who they are as well, because you get to see them in these places of success and these highs and lows. And there's a sort of washing away often of things just become so much better out there in that regard.
And Jared, one of the other trails that you did, and I really wanted to hear about this experience because you completed the Tahoe Rim Trail in just over 9 days, which I think the trail itself is nearly 28,000 feet of elevation gain. In those 9 days, are there any moments that you still think about to this day that kind of stand out?
That trail was a really special trail for a lot of different reasons. And I think that it's kind of the perfect first through hike for folks. And so even if you've hiked thousands of miles, it'd still be incredible. But if you've never done a through hike, it's really great, specifically because you come to a new town every 2 or 3 days, so you can resupply pretty easily. The towns are all very welcoming of hikers, which is not always the case on some of the longer trails. And, for me, when I was out there, I remember that the wildflowers were blooming on this one specific spot, sort of way high up, so above tree line. We were walking on this really cruisy section and everything was just this bright purple, and it was just the whole earth was just purple and really beautiful. The trail itself was really nice. I tried videoing it and I did get some video clips of it, but it just doesn't do it justice, not even remotely. And the other thing that I remember, and this is less about the trail itself, but sort of the culture of the trail, which again, super friendly. There were a number of people who we met who were sort of trail angels along the way. And one woman met us on top of a ridge and she had hiked up this mountain to bring cold drinks to hikers, and that was just her afternoon. She was just going to bring cold drinks and hike them up the mountain. So we got cold soda on top of this mountain, and then she carried our cans out with her. And then there was another time when we ended up in this town called Incline Village, and we were trying to figure out how we were going to get back up to the trail after lunch. And we were just really frustrated. We couldn't figure out how we were going to get back. We didn't want to walk the 6 miles up the road because it was a really busy highway. And as we're walking, this woman runs out onto her front lawn and says, "Hey, are you guys hiking the TRT?" And we said, "We are." And she said, "Well, all right, give me a second. I'll get the keys." And so she chased us down to drive us back to the trail and sort of became a trail angel. And then when we got to the trail, she dropped us off and this other woman walked up quietly to us and handed us birdseed. And we thought, what is going on here? And it turned out we were approaching the section of the trail called Chickadee Ridge, where you hold seed in your hand and these thousands of chickadees, one at a time, will come and eat the seed off of your hand. It was just, I've never seen so many chickadees or any, it was just the coolest. The whole sequence of events that day was just really fun and just a real kind of indicator of what to expect out there on the TRT. And it was just a really special trail in that regard. And while 28,000 feet of elevation is a lot, if you're doing it step by step, I think works out to like 170 feet of elevation gain per mile, which is very, very doable. Relative to the Colorado Trail is about 270 per mile. I think the John Muir Trail is closer to 300 feet per mile, which is, you get the idea. It's a much more accessible trail for a lot of folks.
Oh man, that's awesome that you got to meet some amazing people who did some trail angel work there on the TRT. Kind of going back to the Colorado Trail, you once hiked it with almost entirely 50-year-old gear for its anniversary. And I'm curious, because you've always heard the saying, they don't make it like they used to, or they don't make them like they used to. What worked surprisingly well and what absolutely didn't work?
Yeah, I love this question because I think one of the best parts when I think about this question, one of the things I love is that it doesn't presume everything is better today and it doesn't presume everything is worse today, right? And I think the biggest surprise for me was the external frame backpack is something I would use again. I would absolutely carry that one again. And it had this really unique hip wing system where the frame actually had these hoops around the hips that held up the waistband. So it was this sort of elaborate suspension system. And there'll be pictures I can send along for sure of that. And it was really cool to see that. And it carried all the weight really comfortably. I mean, it was advertised to carry, I think, 75 pounds comfortably, and it had an extension loop to carry even more stuff on top of it. So there was this sort of add-on hoop on the top that was supposed to be there for strapping more gear. That was really nice. I mean, that was the type of gear that I would absolutely use again. I bought a brand new pair of Eddie Bauer K6s, which are these boots that they had been making since 1964. I think, coincidentally, they just quit making them because I've been looking to see if I can find them again. And they were horrible. They were absolutely horrible. I think for the day, they probably were fine. But I went through 4 different sets of insoles over the course of 500 miles. I lost feeling in 3 toes for about a month after the hike. And they were just awful. They were so heavy, 2 pounds a piece. They were the one non-negotiable for the hike, though, is that I knew I wanted brown boots with red laces. That was the one thing I was like, this hike isn't this hike if I don't have brown boots with red laces. And so, I think one of the other takeaways from at least the gear was that I had adjusted the gear for that hike. I didn't adjust my hike for that hike, meaning I was still planning on doing the same miles that I did when I had my 12-pound base weight backpack and 23-pound full backpack weight. I just didn't adjust that. So I think it would have been a different experience if I had hiked it sort of 10 to 12 miles a day instead of trying to do 18 to 20 miles a day. But all the same, I don't think any pace change would ever make me want to wear those boots again.
I mean, even to this day, with all the innovations, Jared, I've shared this on a few episodes. It has taken me a good 2 to 3 years to find the right hiking boot or trail runner. I think I finally found one this year. We'll see. We'll see if it holds up. But yeah, those boots, 2 pounds a piece. I cannot imagine them on my feet without pain shooting up my leg. What you end up doing? Did you immortalize it?
Yeah, so I took the boots, ultimately, I left them in the closet, and so they're right over here. I had this tradition in the past where I would buy a cheap pair of trail runners and throw them away at the end of the trail. And that was sort of my plan with this one, but I ended up save the boots. And I had this idea for the film that I was going to have the last scene be me polishing them up and cleaning them up and giving them away because they were still like good boots. They would work for somebody who needed them. So I had this idea that maybe I would do that. But as the project kind of lingered and everything, I decided that I was going to hang on to them. And, in the film project, as it sort of wrapped up, I used it in this unique way toward the end of the film. And so when I'm able to release the film after festival season, I just would encourage everybody to definitely try to watch the film, but hopefully stay tuned through the credits because it's this sort of little Easter egg at the end of after the credits that's worth watching. So this time next year, hopefully it'll be out for wider consumption and people can see what happened to the boots ultimately.
Almost like a little end of the credits scene, like Marvel. What happened to the boots?
Yep. Yep. Yeah, I think everybody's going to be expecting a scene like Office Space with the fax machine, Well, that's not what happened. Yeah, but
no, Jared, one thing that you do well on your social media is you mix hiking with humor. And I think I'm seeing more of a gravitation of adding that. I think when Instagram first started, it was very much the majestic views with the soundtrack that followed. Why do you think humor resonates so much in the hiking community?
I think hikers are just funny anyway. I think most hikers sort of appreciate sort of levity and some of that humor. And, I have found when I was really building up some of those Instagram posts and trying to figure out what I was going to do with Instagram and whether or not it was going to be a thing for promoting my book projects or whatnot, I started doing just one reel a day with kind of a joke on it, right? And so it was just stock footage with a little bit of music and a little caption that had a joke. It was the lowest effort, but I was trying to figure out some things that I could do to kind of get people interested in whatever, right? Stupid little jokes, nothing major. And I did find that the ones where they were effectively told in a way that the person could imagine themselves saying it or in the second person, those did so much better than my other weird off jokes, Yeah, so effectively what I started doing were these, I started doing those little, just one a day. It was just a little challenge to see. And it gave me this sort of creative outlet. And I loved being able to engage with people and then kind of track and see who found these things funny and who commented, and what would it be largely positive or negative, or how would people handle jokes, right? And most of my jokes are pretty innocuous. They're often, just middle school dad joke kind of things, but it was always fun whenever, occasionally somebody would send me one of my own thinking that I would find it funny. And I always love that because they wouldn't see that it was me who wrote it, and then they would send it back to me. And I thought that was really funny. And occasionally I would see somebody would send me one that they thought I would think is funny. And I realized it was somebody had stolen my joke and put it on theirs, and I got that a handful of times where I would see somebody and I'm like, that's verbatim what I wrote. And I know you didn't write it. And so that was always, anyway, it was one of those things where it was just this creative outlet. I think the humor part of it was fun because it was something that I knew people could enjoy and I could enjoy, but also it's sort of, to your point, kind of an emerging part of the backpacking world. When people started doing Instagram Reels, it was indeed all of these sort of epic views. And that's very much a part of backpacking, but also telling stupid jokes is very much a part of backpacking too.
Yeah, and the one that connected with me was, I think you joked that you're not a real backpacker until you've rage quit while setting up a tent. And I've seen it, especially over the last couple of years as trekking pole tents are becoming more and more popular. I've definitely seen people just say, F it, it's good enough, I'll deal with it. This is as far as I'm going to mess with it. And that made me realize I don't want to deal with that. I like my heavier but easier tent to set up. But in order to cut weight, I finally invested in a Durston trekking pole tent. And I feel like it's coming. I feel like there's going to be a long day on the trail, and I'm just going to say, F it, it's good enough.
There will be one of those days, and it won't be what's going to happen. And I'm calling it now, like Babe Ruth pointing to the center field, right? It's going to be a long day. You're going to have just come to the point where you feel overconfident setting it up. And then you're going to get to a campsite where 2/3 of the stakes will go in, but then you hit rocks on the other 2/3. And no matter how you turn the tent, you hit rocks with 1/3 of your stakes, and it renders the tent unusable in that regard. So it's going to be this sort of culmination. Those are going to be the conditions. And I just want, when you feel that sense coming on, that this might be it, I want you to just set up the camera so we can all have that moment together and share it with you eventually. I had a similar moment when I was trying to set up a camera once on a hike where I put the camera down. You just hear me rattling with it and clanking around and trying to get it to stand up. And it was just the stupid GoPro thing. And I just screamed an F-bomb into the heavens. And it was very embarrassing to look back on now. But it is one of those clips where it's like, this is that frustration and rage and everything at something that doesn't need to be. But anyway, I hope that it doesn't actually happen for you. But I hope if you do feel it coming on, that we get to share it with you.
Yeah, no, that's a good idea, Jared. I think anytime I set it up, I just need to have the camera rolling and capture what happens, regardless of if it's an easy setup or if it's a frustrating one, and just be able to look back on it, share it with the community, and hopefully laugh about it.
I think it would be cool to see the progression, really. I mean, in all seriousness, it would be really fun for us to see like the first time you set it up and then kind of the second, third, and then see how quickly you get better at it. Because I think that would be instructive for a lot of folks. Like if you know that it's going to be difficult or frustrating the first time, then how long does it take until you feel proficient? And then how long after you feel proficient does my prophecy come true that you rage quit?
Okay, I like that. It could be a series. Now, Jared, I imagine with all these thousands of miles under your belt, you've seen some pretty hilarious things on and maybe even off the trail. Is there any moment that particularly stands out as one of the funnier experiences on trail?
There have been a few really good ones. The best ones weren't necessarily on trail per se, but they were during canoe trips with my little brother. So my little brother is my best friend, and he and I were able to go on these sort of week-long canoe trips in the Everglades. And we had so many misadventures the first 2 years we went out there. And one of them was we started out the day at this visitor center on the very southern tip of Florida, like literally the bottom of the peninsula. There's a town of Flamingo, and we were going to go to what's called a chickie. There are these open water docks you camp on, and they're super cool. And there was an island maybe 400 yards out from the visitor center, and the chickie was on the other sort of to the left past the island. And we didn't check any tide charts or anything because we hadn't done this before. And so we took off from the visitor center and we started watching, and you could see from Florida to Key West, right? From the tip of Florida, the mainland to Key West, it only gets about 7 feet deep. So when the tide goes out there, it goes out fast and it was just ripping out. And we lost about 4 feet of water in maybe 15 minutes. And we were immediately beached within eyeshot of the visitor center. We couldn't push the canoe because the mud was like just too sticky. So we ended up sitting within eyeshot of the visitor center for 4 hours waiting for the tide to come back in and just had to play cards. And we could hear, the little binocular things you put the quarter in and you can look out. So we could hear the kids getting quarters to stare at us from the binoculars because we were close enough to hear their conversations. And we just looked like such doofuses. And when we finally saw the tide charts and then saw the depth charts for the area, it was clear that even in full tide, we were going to have a hard time going that way. And if we had just looked at the map for a moment, we would have known we had to go around the island rather than between the island and the mainland. But that was a tough one. And then that led to the rest of the trip where in a planning gaffe, I had gotten really excited about these freeze-dried ingredients that REI was selling in pouches. And it was sort of make your own food kits, but they were just giving you samples of lots of different freeze-dried food. And I forgot to pack any other meals. So we spent a week in the Everglades eating variations of vegetable soup. Just every day we just mixed up different vegetables and that's all we had were just vegetable soups. It didn't even cross my mind to go shopping for any other food beyond that. That was a tough trip, but it was some of the best stories from the trips.
Now, Jared, you've mentioned, your love for national parks, and I feel like you're on the home stretch because you visited more than 50 national parks so far. In your opinion, seeing so many, are there any that stand out as being underrated or maybe that still holds a particularly meaningful moment for you?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think the underrated that's one of my favorites to talk about because there are so many that are fantastic for many reasons. The Yosemite is easily one of my favorites. The Zions, the Isle Royale is absolutely incredible. But there are a couple of gems there in Great Basin National Park, which is just 4 hours from Salt Lake City, just over the border in Nevada, is absolutely stunning. It's surprising to think of Nevada as being mountainous, but it's a really special park. I also think Guadalupe Mountains National Park down there on the Texas-New Mexico border. Just a gem of a small park. I think Everglades, the one I just mentioned, is a surprisingly good park for people. And I think a lot of people get scared of swamps. But there's so much happening down there that you can do without ever seeing an alligator. I mean, it's coastal as well. So you can stay saltwater and see manatees and dolphins and all sorts of other things. Yeah, I mean, I think they're just some of those gems that are just waiting to be discovered by a lot of folks. Lassen Volcanic near where you are is another one that I think people just don't think about as much, but is really special too.
Yeah, all those are still on my bucket list. And I've driven by Lassen. I've seen the sign and I'm always, on a schedule to make it to somewhere else. And it's definitely high on the bucket list for California parks to visit.
I mean, the California parks, all of them are just really dynamite, except for one, but I'm not going to talk trash about a national park here. But I do think, with the islands, Channel Islands National Park is one that gets so little press and is so good. I mean, just such a special park too. That was a really nice one for so many reasons. Yep.
Now, Jared, these last couple questions I wanted to ask you because you're doing something really great. You're talking openly about managing ADHD on the trail. And for you, how does being outside affect your focus and mental state?
This is something that's become sort of central feature of my life. I got my full diagnosis about 3 years ago, right after Patty and I were married. There were some times whenever, we would, ADHD comes with a litany of problems that are understood by folks. I think the sort of common idiom for people is like ADHD is, oh, look, a squirrel. And I don't think that's wrong necessarily. I just think that it's really limited in what it understands about ADHD, right? One of the things that I think would surprise folks is like my ADHD assessment, I just looked at it the other day, was 23 pages long. Now, if it's just you're distracted easily, what are they saying for 23 pages, right? And it comes with so many other complications and challenges and certain strengths. I mean, there are certain things that I can do exceptionally well, often at inappropriate times, right? So I can, if I get on a side quest, I can learn more about the wasps of Western North Carolina in an hour than you could in a month, but it's probably when I should be picking up my kids from school, So the start of the question there was managing my ADHD on trail. And I think one of the things is it's almost like the reality is that I manage ADHD through the trail. And what I mean by that is trails give me something to focus on. It gives me a direct goal, something concrete. One of the common things with ADHD is, we have a real intensity of excitement and ability to hyper-focus at the start of exciting projects, but then we often lose that, especially once the path to completion becomes clear. So if I can see the finish line and how I'm going to get there with a difficult project, that's when things get really hard. So I have a closet full of projects that are 80% finished, And so I think the trail is an interesting place to help me finish projects and remember, that there is a way to problem solve. There's a way to do these things. And it's, of course, this answer feels a little bit all over the map. But when I'm on trail, I think one of the things that becomes clear is that it helps me to kind of get back to who I am because it reduces everything to the basics. All I have to do is move, keep myself alive, and keep my stuff together. And I don't have things I can forget very easily because everything goes in the backpack. I have a very simple goal for every day. And then that opens up my mind to start processing some of the things that can be kind of rattling around in there throughout my regular life. And I think many people who have ADHD will likely feel similarly. I don't want to speak for people, but I also will say that one of the things that is really helpful is the ability, we talked about community. And there's this famous quote by Russell Barkley. He's this doctor who is sort of the leading speaker on ADHD. And he says that ADHD is the number one predictor of how many friends you are not going to have. And specifically because people with ADHD have difficulty not interrupting, and we have emotional regulation issues where, especially when injustice is present, we tend to be very stubborn, right? That we can't tolerate injustice, right? If I felt like somebody was being treated unfairly, that's not something I can sit with, So anyway, in the bigger picture of it, being on trail is a place where I meet people who are similar to me in some regard. We have something in common right away. So we can begin developing friendships and over this shared interest. Whereas in regular life, it's very difficult because my intensity can be too much for people and my excitement. And then there's also this sort of added complication of a lesser known symptom of ADHD is called rejection sensitive dysphoria, which is this sort of hypersensitivity to feeling as if you're being rejected by people when something small happens, right? And it's sort of debilitating for a lot of folks. And it's expected by many to be part of the official ADHD sort of matrix coming out in the next DSM, whenever that will happen. But effectively, being on trail gives me an opportunity to connect with people, remove some of those barriers, and also leverages some of that, my normal intensity, makes it a lot easier to kind of handle because it's something the other person's already excited about. If you and I are talking about tents and I get excited about a Durston, that's good because you're excited about a Durston too, right? But if I get excited about a Durston and you're somebody that I just met at a coffee shop, that intensity takes on a whole different meaning for you. And it makes it a lot tougher, admittedly, for other people often, but the trail just gives me so many different ways to connect with people, myself, etc.
And you were able to share that you did something special on the Colorado film by incorporating and looking at neurodivergence in the outdoors. How did that segment of the film kind of come about for you?
The initial project was just going to be, here's some cool old gear, and this is a cool trail, right? And then I recorded the film in 2024 on the 50th anniversary of the Colorado Trail's founding, and then tried to make a film. And sat down every day. I would sit right here in this basement and for hours stare at my computer, try to figure out what I was doing, get frustrated for almost 2 years. And then, eventually I had to figure out how to get through this project. And I realized that it was really close to becoming one of those projects in my hobby graveyard, And so that's when it all kind of came together. Like, oh, this is an opportunity to show that I can finish a project and do this thing and show myself, show my kids that I can do this project. And so that's when the film started to be about, not so much about the trail, more just about finishing a thing, And that opened the door for a lot richer conversations about ADHD within the film as well.
And Jared, I know that you mentioned that it's going to be doing the festival circuit here this year. Is that going to be potentially, depending on where people live, they might be able to see it at a nearby festival?
Yeah, that's the hope. So the hope is I'm submitting it to festivals right now. And then as it starts to get in, hopefully, whether or not it gets in remains to be seen. The goal initially was just to get into one festival. And I'm very much an amateur. I did all the taping myself and almost all the taping myself. And all the editing myself. I'm still very much an amateur there. So we'll see. But the goal is, yes, to have it at different festivals around the country. The one that I'm really hoping to get into is in Australia, actually, and it is dedicated to trails, but we'll see if I get in there. But ultimately, if folks are interested following Backcountry Champion on Instagram, then I'll be posting when we do find out if we get in and when we'll be showing up in towns. And I do hope to be able to meet people and share this project with as many people as possible, and hopefully as well, maybe do a screening or two of my own throughout the course of the year and maybe have some broader conversations about neurodivergence, ADHD, hiking culture, etc.
And is the Instagram the best way to kind of keep up to date with updates on the film?
Yep. Instagram's the best way to follow on that one. Now we do have our website, which backcountrychampions.org. It's the nonprofit's website. There will be some announcements there, but very much the Instagram is definitely the best way to go. And also for anybody who is looking to get out there and go hiking, this is just something that I mentioned. It's how I met my wife, was offering to help people plan backpacking trips. And so if you are new to backpacking or trying to get out there on the Colorado Trail, the Tahoe Rim Trail, feel free to shoot me a message over there. I'd love to talk about your planning process and how we can help you get out there and feel confident about the adventure. Because as you know, we need folks out there who feel a connection to these spaces. And I'm more than excited to help people feel confident and get out there and have those experiences.
That's awesome, Jared. And we'll be sure to put the Instagram profile in the episode show notes so people can reach out and follow along. Well, that was it for the regular questions, Jared. This next section is our new rapid fire section for season 14. And I'll give you some questions, and I'd love to hear what your response is to some of these. So the first one is, do you have a pre-hike ritual or a first mile mindset?
Ooh, that's a great question. I think the pre-hike ritual is panicking about the trip and and forgetting something, right? Like the classic waiting till last minute ADHD thing. But I think ultimately with the ritual, there are two quotes that I come back to, and I'm probably going to botch them. But the one is from Blue Highways, and it's this great travel narrative about a guy who traveled the country in a van, and in the 70s, 80s, before van life was really a thing. And he says, there are two types of people: those who go on adventures hoping to find it, and those who go out on adventures hoping not to find it. And then there's another by John Steinbeck in Travels with Charlie, where he talks about how every person before a great adventure secretly hopes something happens so they don't have to go on that adventure. And both of these, the reason I come back to those as kind of a ritual is I find them both very calming and soothing to know that, if I'm anxious about a hike, it doesn't mean I don't love the hike or want to go. It's that this is all part of the process of getting out there, is these sort of jitters and nerves and worrying about what's going to happen at home. And am I going to miss out on something, or am I going to be, any number of those things. But ultimately that ritual would be just kind of reminding myself that all the jitters are totally normal and part of the process.
Now, this one's going to be a tough one. Is there a go-to post-hike meal or drink you regularly get?
That one is perfect. Yeah, pizza and beer. Always pizza and beer. If you can make pizza and beer happen, that's the move. Cheeseburgers, close second, absolutely. And then any Mexican food. Anytime you can get Mexican food and a margarita after a hike, that's a great way to go too. So, but it's sort of in that sort of order for me that it'd be that. But the space between them is so slight that, it could be the difference in walking across the street. That if there's a pizza place across the street and a Mexican place next to me, I'm probably staying for the Mexican food.
Like those choices? Now, these next two are about gear. What's one piece of gear you'll never compromise on?
I think a sleeping pad at this point. I think that's probably it, that I can do a lot of things, but a sleeping pad is probably the one that I'm not going to compromise on. And I slept on a closed foam cell pad on the TRT, and I might as well have been sleeping on rocks. I mean, it was awful. I think a good sleeping pad is probably it, or socks, really good socks. Those are going to be the things that I'm not going to compromise on.
And then on the flip side, what's the most overrated piece of outdoor gear in your personal opinion?
Rain gear. Always rain gear. What are we doing here? If it's raining hard, you need to set up your tent and get out of it. But if you keep hiking with rain gear on, you're just going to be wet with sweat on the inside and water on the outside. So what are you doing? Just get wet. Leave your jacket, get wet, and if it gets too bad, set up your tent, climb in it. I mean, I'm probably going to catch a lot of heat for that one, but I'll wear a rain jacket, sometimes like a Frog Togs, but I don't understand how people are spending hundreds of dollars on rain jackets that are just going to be sweat collectors.
No, out of all the things I'm looking at ditching this year, it's my Frog Togs gear. I might carry a poncho, but sometimes somebody told me it's like, if it's just a drizzle, just embrace it.
Yep. And the poncho, you can actually get the ones with the guy out points and use those as a tarp when it's not too bad to keep going, but not too bad to set up the tent. And so I think those work really, and you can get some wind through there. They are tough to kind of get over your backpack. I'll say that I can't figure out how to, if I don't have another person with me, it's going to be a problem. But I support the poncho move 100%.
And then this last one, Jared, is, we're recording this in March. Spring hiking season is descended upon us, and we're almost to the summer hiking season. Is there any hiking or adventure goals that you have for the remainder of the year, or anything exciting on the horizon that we should look out for?
I'm not sure I'll be able to pull it off because of the festival season we talked about might drain all my money, but I got permits a while ago, and I'm not sure why people haven't done this before. So I hope I'm not cursing myself to never being able to set up this hike again in the future if I don't get to go this year. But I hiked the John Muir Trail northbound in the past. And if you go northbound on the JMT, you have to hike in 2 days to get to the JMT usually. And so instead of going that way from Cottonwood Pass, sort of the Eastern Sierra, I got a permit where I could do the High Sierra Trail to the top of Mount Whitney and then continue from Mount Whitney to do the John Muir Trail. So the High Sierra Trail and John Muir Trail in one fell swoop. I don't know that I'll be able to make it happen, but all the same, if I did, that would be 2 bucket list hikes on the same trip. And I think it would be really cool. And it only adds a day to the hike. So I don't know why people haven't thought to do that. And also, it's a lot easier to get to Sequoia National Park from Fresno than it is to get to Cottonwood Pass, even from Bishop. And so I'm talking a lot of geography here, but basically it'd be a lot easier to get to the starting point doing it that way. You add a day to the trip and you're adding a bucket list hike to the trip. I mean, get out of here.
I like that. Definitely be on the lookout for that. Is that potentially later this summer?
Yep. So if I get to do that, that'll be in July. It's still long shot probably at this point. I mean, it might be something like that. But then maybe in the winter, I'd like to do the Everglades, the Wilderness Waterway. It's a sort of 120-mile canoe route through the Everglades. And so maybe I can get 1 or 2 of those going. That would be really cool too.
Well, that was it, Jared. We always like to finish each episode with a section of this or that questions. These are all hiking related. I'm going to give you 2 options. You choose which one you prefer out of the 2. But the first one is dense forest or wide open views?
Ooh, great question. Dense forest. I think there's something cool about the idea of that sort of being closed in a dense forest, especially some of those spruce forests up in like New England. And there's just something otherworldly about it. The wide open views are spectacular, but they are that feeling of being enclosed and then kind of feeling like you're in a fairy tale of sorts. That's a really cool feeling for sure.
And this one's going to be another tough one. Peak bagging or wandering miles?
Wandering miles, yeah. I don't need to bag any peaks, no way. I mean, I get it. If people like bagging peaks, that's great. But, this is very much like the sensory overload ADHD thing. But my experience is that when you get to the top of the peaks, you hit those spots where you have those rocky, craggy kind of trails where the rocks scrape against each other. And that's just like chalkboard nails and nails on a chalkboard to me. So I think peak bagging is a lot of fun for a lot of folks. For me, I don't want to be on those trails where you end up with all that rock kind of scratching around under your feet if I can avoid it.
And I'm curious about this one because, you mentioned your Honda Pilot days and, you've spent many nights in a tent on trail. But if you had a choice, would you choose a cabin stay or would you rather tent camp?
I think probably still a cabin. I think I'm getting to that age, like a cabin. Tough part is if I'm in a cabin, I don't know that I'm going to get out and do much hiking. You know what I mean? Like a cabin to me is just, I'm going to go and I'm going to relax and that's it. But a tent is one of those that's really cool because that's like, I'm definitely going to hike. It's all about being able to camp somewhere that you have to work to get there. So I'm going to change it. Let's say tent. I'm going to go tent. Like this is what I'm doing today is basically cabin camping. There's, it's close enough. I want to do something a little different. Let's do a tent.
And then this one's going to be tough. It's one of our tougher ones for the season, but bug bites or blisters?
Bug bites. Yeah, bug bites. There's blisters I think lead to further problems because if you get blisters, you're going to change your gait. You're going to, they're always going to hurt when you're moving. Bug bites, they go down a little bit. There's something sort of personally that's satisfying about itching a bug bite, even if it gets really bad. Probably too much information. But yeah, I think I mean, I would take a mosquito bite every day just to have something to do, I guess, but like a blister is not something I would voluntarily choose.
Now, this one's our new controversial one, and I've seen both of these on trail, especially when it comes to through hikes. But if you had to choose, would you do nature sounds only, or would you put an earbud in to either listen to music, a podcast, an audiobook?
Earbuds, yeah, for sure. I think one of the things... No Bluetooth speakers. Like, I think we can all accept that that's unacceptable. But I think often we get so hung up on how you have to engage with nature, right? And like one of the things that I don't quite understand, like we're going to go out in a nylon tent to shield ourselves from nature and then pretend that we have to engage with nature with our ears, but it's okay for us to shield ourselves from nature with sunscreen that's not something of nature, with sunglasses made of polycarbonate plastic. So we have to protect our this other thing. But I think the lines we're drawing there are just very arbitrary and silly. And I think if putting in a headphone and listening to some music makes your experience feel better, go for it, right? If going out there and listening to nature sounds makes you feel better, go for it. There's no right way to engage with nature. There are plenty of wrong ways if you're not practicing L&T, but any line you're drawing between what's natural and what's not has to be metered by the fact that you're wearing rubber on your feet. You're wearing clothes made of synthetic fibers that are not natural to shield yourself from the effects of nature, but then you're going to force yourself to engage with nature in this one very specific random place because somehow you feel like it's morally superior. I'm not buying it.
I like that take. Now, this next one's about footwear, trail runners or hiking boots.
Trail runners, for sure. I have all these great pictures of me from my early days of backpacking, and I used to have this confusion where I thought big boots for a big hike. And the irony is, what I've learned is smaller everything for a bigger hike, And so I think trail runners provide so many better opportunities. I know some people need the hiking boots for various ankle issues, that sort of thing. And so this is not necessarily for them. But for most people, having a good pair of trail runners is going to be so much better for you in the long run, pun intended, right? That I think a good pair of trail runners are more comfortable. They're going to lead to less injuries. They're less strain on your knees, swinging around lighter weights. They're just myriad reasons. But for me personally as well, they're more comfortable and they dry out easier whenever they get wet. And there's nothing worse than putting on a wet pair of boots. That's a pretty awful experience.
And then the follow-up question this season for the footwear, for you personally, does it matter? Does it have to be a Vibram outsole or can it just be the regular brand outsole?
Whatever you can get your hands on, just fine. I think, use whatever you got. I've hiked 1,000 miles wearing the cheapest pair of Asics Basics shoes that I could find off the internet that would fit me. They worked fine. I've worn the Vibram everything. They worked fine too. I think there's no... wear blue jeans too. Wear cotton. I think we get to this point where there's this belief in how we have to engage with the space and our gear is somehow this marker of how much you know about the space. But then when you get into a lot of the thru hikers and you start seeing the folks who are doing the bigger hikes, and I'm not talking about myself here, but you see what they're using and it's often, they're buying Tyvek to sleep on and not the expensive ground sheets, and they're using, Walmart socks instead of the expensive darn toughs and stuff, So I think use what'll get you out in the wilderness. And if you like the Vibrams and have the wallet for it, get them. But if you don't, as long as you're outside, whatever's under your feet doesn't matter. Unless they're Eddie Bauer K6s, those can burn in hell.
Now, this next one's another tough one, Jared, but if you had to choose between these two types of conditions, would you choose a windy summit or a cloudy summit?
Cloudy. Yeah. Wind is the worst. Wind is so demoralizing, so quickly demoralizing. Clouds, they're a bummer, but they're not demoralizing in the way that wind just breaks a spirit so quickly. Give me clouds. They're not going to make my day, but they're not going to break my day either.
And then I think I know the answer to this one, but national park or hidden gem?
Hidden gem within a national park. So some of those places where the lesser known spots in the national parks, I mentioned the Wilderness Waterway. A lot of people don't know about those, or the chickies that you camp on those open water docks. And, I think about the young lakes in Yosemite that a lot of people don't know about, or these sort of places. They're just some really great spots in the national parks that are hidden gems. But when I first started getting into backpacking, somebody at the gear shop told me once, they said, go to Badlands. And I said, is it worth it? And he said, yeah, they're national parks for a reason. reason. And that stuck with me, that they really are national parks for a reason for the most part. You can skip Indiana Dunes, but most of the national parks are national parks for a reason.
And then spring wildflowers or fall colors?
Fall colors, yeah, but that's a tough one. And the only reason that I'm saying fall colors is that spring wildflowers often come with spring showers, and fall tends to be generally drier. So, you get the beautiful colors, but you also end up in a lot better situation by way of precipitation.
And then the last one, Jared, if you had to choose, would you choose type 1 fun or type 2 fun?
I think type 2. I think, I'm a pretty cranky old guy, so I don't know that I could enjoy type 1 fun anymore. I live a pretty good life, and I don't think I'm really amped about it all the time, So I think give me some type 2 fun and let me punish myself for being a bummer sometimes and get out there and have some good memories. And yeah, type 2 fun, I think, is the way to go.
Awesome, Jared. Well, that was it for the this or that questions. For folks that want to follow your journey and learn more about Backcountry Champions, where are some of the places they can find you both online and on social media?
You can find me on Instagram at Backcountry Champion. You can find me on YouTube at Outside Comfort Zone. There are a lot of really great tip videos there specifically for the Colorado Trail. That's sort of how I cut my teeth in YouTube. And then you can find the Backcountry Champions Creative Studio at backcountrychampions.org. Feel free to shoot me an email at backcountrychampion@gmail.com. And if you're either needing some help with a backpacking trip or you've got a book idea that you'd like to get off the ground, let me know. I'd love to talk to you about that as well.
Awesome, Jared. And we'll be sure to put those in the episode show notes so people can check them out. It has been a blast speaking with you and learning about your experiences and the great work that you're doing for the outdoor community. Really appreciate you taking the time out of your evening to speak with us.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. This has been a lot of fun. I appreciate it.
And that brings us to the end of this episode alongside Jared. We extend a heartfelt thanks to him for joining us on the podcast. Be sure to follow him on Instagram at Backcountry Champion. And for more, be sure to check out the episode show notes. This episode of Hikes and Mics was produced by Jordan Smith. Be sure to follow her adventures on Instagram at jordan.journeys. New episodes will drop every Monday throughout the spring hiking season, with the occasional Friday bonus episode along the way. To make sure you never miss a moment of these inspiring trail stories, hit that follow or subscribe button. Your support truly keeps this community moving forward, one episode at a time. Don't forget to connect with us on Instagram at Hikes and Mics. That's where you'll find behind-the-scenes episode visuals, my own spring hiking adventures, and plenty more to keep that fresh air stoke alive as the season heats up. As we wrap up today's journey, remember, the trails are waking up, the wildflowers are on their way, and there's never been a better time to get out there and explore. So tread those happy trails, soak in the sunshine, and keep chasing what's just around that next bend. Until next time, my fellow hikers, happy hiking. This episode's music was created by Ketsa. Follow along with him on Instagram at Ketsa Music. This episode is brought to you by Ursa Minor Outfitters. Folks, I'm absolutely in love with my loon mug. It's handmade, it's an absolute piece of art. Whether it's at the office or at the house, people keep asking to check it out. If you're not a loon fan, they also have other beautiful mugs for wildlife fans of moose, bears, and eagles. They specialize in products highlighting the outdoors and local pride through quality design by local artists. They've even started expanding into items beyond mugs, like apparel, dog accessories, and soon candles and more. They also try to partner and highlight other small businesses, and in some cases, forego profits in lieu of charitable giving to help their community, such as the dog rescue. So check them out, UrsaMinorOutfitters.com, and enter promo code HikesMikes10 at checkout to receive 10% off your order. And for our four-legged hiking partners, they also have a portable silicone dog bowl and also a sweet over-the-collar dog bandana. Go check them out, UrsaMinorOutfitters.com, and don't forget to enter promo code HikesMikes10 at checkout to receive 10% off your order.